Welcome once again. Now, in political lingo, one day is long enough to make a major difference. Just one day can determine how the future of a political situation is going to develop like. Now, today, I want us to venture into what has been happening in our country politically lately. We have had since June the Gen Zs leading in the area of demonstrations against the government. And in spite of every effort by the members of parliament to see to it that the 2024 finance bill was passed, there came a day, and that was on a Thursday, when all that changed. When the Gen Zs stormed parliament, that was the genesis of a new political era in our country. Because we have seen the president act in accordance or with due respect or an attempt thereby to take into consideration what the Gen Zs resisted during their demonstrations against the government. Now, that day, it follows that he had to take into account what the Gen Zs were up against. It was just a day. And the subsequent days that followed saw the president take up a different step from what he had previously been following. Now, we have also another interesting scenario that is in the development stage. Now, we have one tycoon by the name of JIMI Wanjigi, who is now coming up more strongly. And I want to mention here that it is by support that he continues and will continue to enjoy from the Gen Z's revolt and the movement in itself. And how is this? Now, Mheshimiwa JIMI Wanjigi has confessed to the extent that he had been sponsoring the Gen Z demonstrations. And there's nothing wrong about that. There's nothing illegal about that. And I'm very sure that even though he has been taken to court with that as one of the counts that he's faced with, I believe very strongly that on that one, there is a very, very high likelihood of not being a basis upon which any conviction can be entered. Now, what is happening now and what is about to happen? What is happening now is that Mheshimiwa JIMI Wanjigi is now riding on the wave that was created by the Gen Zs. Of course, He has been supporting them. And Gen Zs had every legitimacy to be supported, because what they expressed with the rejection of the Finance Bill 2024 is what a majority of Kenyans were actually complaining about: the passing of the Finance Bill 2024 into an act of law. So, Mheshimiwa Jimmy Wanjigi, as it stands, and who has been there before, a candidate in the presidential race, is now coming out more strongly as a very serious opponent of President Ruto in the coming elections, 2027. That being so, what do people or the public expect? Or what should they expect? Now, the truth of the matter is that the Gen Zs cannot field a candidate of any other, you know, political challenge to Jimmy Wanjigi. Why? Because that will now be dividing the vote. And let's not forget the fact that what we have in the minds as we approach 2027 is to see that Ruto does not come back to office. That is a view that a majority of Kenyans hold today. And that is including the many youths who supported and voted for him as the 5th president of the Republic of Kenya. Now, this is very interesting, that the same youths now coming out as the Gen Zs revolted against President Ruto and his government. Now, going forward, Jimmy Wanjigi is going to become the most serious opponent of Ruto's government and the next serious challenger of during the presidential elections. So let us ask ourselves this question: when did Kenyans last win an election? What we have been having are individuals winning elections. We have had disputed election results since 2007. And why we did not have a similar sequence there before is because the constitution we had in place by then did not uphold what extent the current constitution offers in terms of liberty. And so previously, we have had every leader who comes in use intimidation to silence any opposition, or in this matter, a different view. Now, every action that the government of President Ruto may intend to take against JIMI Wanjigi is most likely going to be countered by civil disobedience. It is going to face more street protests demanding that the whatever rule or action taken against JIMI Wanjigi be revoked. And so what is happening essentially here is that the Gen Zs have now to contend with the fact that with every passing day, with every passing moment, what they are doing is rubber stamping JIMI Wanjigi for the next presidential contest. Let's not forget the fact that the Gen Z movement was faceless and has been faceless, leaderless, tribeless, and faceless. But now, it will now come up with their having to support JIMI Wanjigi, who has been facing persecution for his own admission of being a supporter of the Gen Z movement. Therefore, we go back to our same question that I have asked a few minutes ago. When is the last time that Kenyans won an election? What do I intend to mean by this? What I am targeting here is to question why there has always been disputed presidential results. Actually, if it is not about rigging, it is about intimidation. Who are being intimidated? It is the leaders of a contrary opinion to that of the government of the day. Why have there been cases of rigging? To still send back to office the same regime that is facing serious opposition. What we have seen in previous years is that a regime in power uses every means at its disposal to ensure that it goes in for a full term. And a full term here is not a 5-year term, but a 10-year term. So every government that comes into office will work head over heels to make sure that it goes in for the maximum period of 10 years. Needless to say, what the country has been facing and what the people have been carrying in their hearts about this government is total displeasure. And so, this is likely to make President Ruto's government of Kenya Kwanza a one-term office holder. Now, my second question is, will Kenyans have won by having JIMI Wanjigi take over as the next President of the Republic of Kenya? This is a very serious question that we must face. Because what we are observing is that the same wave of sympathy votes that was used to usher in President Ruto and his Kenya Kwanza government is the same idea or trick that is in its development with reference to JIMI Wanjigi's political pursuits. And so he's likely to be a winner of the next presidential election, making him Kenya's 6th president. But I go back again to my question. By Kenyans voting in JIMI Wanjigi as the 6th president of the Republic of Kenya, will they have won an election? I doubt they will have. How then can we see to it that Kenyans become the winners of the next general election and not an individual like it has always been? Believe it or not, take it or leave it. The truth of the matter here is we do not have a system that we as Kenyans embrace to determine who will represent our interests to the core in accordance with the Constitution. Because the Constitution is the foundation of all laws, and it is the Constitution that the ordinary person in Kenya will use, and not just in Kenya, everywhere else in the world, will use to defend his right. So, are we about to lose like we have always been? The answer is yes. We have no check in place that we can use to determine who our next leader or our next leaders should be. And that is where we'll find ourselves losing again after the spirited effort to remove Kenya Kwanza government in office. Time and again, I have spoken about what I have been very much advocating for. Inverse salaries for political office. I want to repeat it here again, that democracy is a fake system. If it were genuine to any good or acceptable extent, then we would be having a country that is miles ahead socially, economically, and politically. Now we only have a country that is very much ahead politically. Economically, we are failing, and socially, it is not holding any ground. Why? Simply because Kenyans have expressed their displeasure about the government in place for not taking adequate measures to protect the social background of the ordinary people in the country today. So, what is it about when I speak about inverse salaries for political office holders? What I'm passing across here is that why we have not been faring well politically, economically, and socially, it is because we elect leaders in position who are focused in their personal interests. I will want to mention it here again that it is this cadre of people who happen to be millionaires, multimillionaires, and multi-billionaires who have been in office since independence. And their being in office has not generated any significant benefit to the Kenyan people. Don't be fooled about those structures that we have. Mega highways, buildings, projects, which are meant to serve the majority of Kenyans, but which at the same time only capture the well-to-do in society. Now, the well-to-do find themselves in the capacity to utilize those major projects initiated by the government, which actually is a milestone to a particular individual in a particular political party, with a particular political interest, to benefit themselves first before they actually serve the interests of the people. Now, why haven't we ever had leaders interested in leading us who are willing to forego those salaries that they enjoy in the public office? Mind you, if you consider the fact that we only have millionaires, multimillionaires, multi-billionaires in government, I want to draw your attention to the fact that you cannot be a multimillionaire who solely depends upon salaries on and in service as a politician. These people have other income generating projects. They don't just rely in what they gain as salaries. That is why we will always have cases of grand corruption involving monies that have been taken as loans from international entities, having to go and cater for recurrent budget, for instance, and other unnecessary expenditures, including misappropriation. Now, that being the case, I want to venture into this question. Why do we keep electing individuals based on their capacity financially? It is because of the misconception that these people will go and be of good to the general population, which has always turned out not to be the case. It has always been, and it will continue to be, my position that we need to have a new spirit, new faces, people who are new and not aligned to any cartels that exist or would exist once they go and become our political leaders. That is why we need to have an inverse salaries for political office system in place. Let those who are rich enough keep away from politics. Let us have new leaders in place. And the only way to usher in that new group of spirited leaders, new spirited leaders, is by using the inverse salaries for political office system as a sieve that will determine who comes in for how long and for what public interest. And at the end of the day, we'll come up with a measure, a law that first evaluates that person's worth, how much he has generated or acquired ever since he came into office, by the time he vies either for the second vote, for the second term, or walks out after the second term. We are between a rock and a hard place. If we do not make our choices well enough, we are going to have an election won by an individual rather than the people. Take care. They say that being informed